So thank you so much for joining this session. I would like to welcome everyone in this today's session for securing identity with zero trust. And myself, Sebastain Gomes, as introduced by Liji. I'm based out of Melbourne, Australia, and I also have around 14 plus years of experience in infrastructure, and especially with Microsoft technologies like Azure and Microsoft 365. Very glad to be part of this session. So without wasting further time, let us move ahead with today's session. And looking forward with our agenda, so we will cover the guiding principles of zero trust, and we need to understand why are we securing identities and what is zero trust. Just to give you a quick background, zero trust is not a technology, but it is a security model and kind of a framework where we need to follow certain principles to get that 100% security to the identities. And the next, we will talk about zero trust components. What are the important driving factors within the zero trust? What are those critical components that we need to focus on? And then we will understand more about zero trust and why it is important. Why do we require that zero trust for every organization? And what are the important parameters that we'll be focusing on? And then in the last, we will see what are the things that need to be followed to deploy to complete that identity with zero trust deployment. What are those important configurations? What are those important features within Azure that we need to understand and configure to achieve 100% zero trust identity security? And then my friend Hasnain Shaikh will walk us through the quick demonstration from the Azure portal and the lab, what is being prepared. Let me walk you through the rest of the slides. I would request everyone to make a note of the questions if you anything arises, and make a note of it, because in the end we have a quick Q&A session where we would be more than happy to answer as many as questions. Okay, so what are those guiding principles of zero trust? Just to give you a tagline for this particular topic, it always says never trust, always verify. Because in the past we have seen there is a huge drastic change in the way the organizations are working, the style of working, the style of users connecting. Just to give you a quick background about how it used to be in the IT infrastructure, as we all are aware that probably I think around 10 years back, how the employees used to work. If it was a mindset, it was a culture that any employee, if they want to work, if they want to connect to, then they have to be in the physical location of the office premises. There was a boundaries, physical boundaries, and if any employee wanted to connect from home, then there used to be a VPN client applications or softwares they need to launch and connect to the corporate networks to access the resources from home. A lot of things need to be there, because there were mostly the organizations were focusing on protecting their network environment in the network layer, because the attackers in those days, they used to target only at the network level to hack or to enter into the corporate network. But now things have changed, because especially for a few years now, users are connecting from anywhere. They are connecting from any kind of devices. They bring their own devices. They connect from different remote locations. They connect from laptops, desktops, and it may not be necessary that the device is from office. That's the reason now the attacker's way of attacking is shifted from network level to identity level. That's when the organizations started focusing on protecting the identities. On top of the network perimeter, now identity perimeter is very, very crucial and critical. We need to understand that the style of working is being drastically changed. That's the reason the number one principle here says verify explicitly. It means that there should be a mechanism which should always authenticate and authorize based on all the available data points. The request might come from the physical location within the corporate network, or the login request might come from a very remote location, or maybe from any device. But there should be a standard set of protocols for the authentication to follow and allow the right user to access the right resources. That's when the first principle is very critical, which is verify explicitly. And with that, moving on to the use least privileged access. And this is very, very critical because we may not know which user require access to which resource at what particular time. And also it is very unsure and unpredictable that what could be the user's location and what could be the user's device that he's accessing from. That's the reason, to avoid all those kind of complications, to avoid any kind of misuse of those resources, we need to make sure there should be certain policies which should be automated and take control of the access to the users. Now, for example, one user require access to reset someone's password on one particular day, probably access one application on one particular day to complete the project. But he may not require that access throughout the year, throughout the month. So what we can do in many cases when the change management happens, there could be some kind of tasks that some admins has to do some particular task, which could be once in a month or once in a quarter, once in 6 months. And during that particular time, there is a feature called privileged access management, which is just-in-time access. The user can be allowed or provided that access for 1 hour or for 2 hours or for whatever time frame that is required, and it should be justified. And it will not happen just the user access. We do have provisions of giving some kind of extra layers of approvals. Once the user requests the access of particular resource on particular time and date, then it can go to his manager. If our features, if we have that settings in place, then the manager approves that, and then administrators will provide access to that particular user to do that activity. And once that time frame is over, that access will be revoked and that user will not be able to access that resource. So with this, lot of things, a lot of risks will be avoided, a lot of risks will be controlled. So just-in-time access is one of the important feature. It will not provide extremely unnecessary permissions for anyone to access. Whatever is needed with the least privilege, it will provide, and it will help in a big way to control the security of the identities and data and the network. And the last one is assume breach. So this is helps to minimize the radius of any kind of breach is going to happen. If we can segment the network layer into multiple different set of network layers, like for front end servers, if we have a different network, and for the database servers, if we have different network, and if we can have different network for applications servers, so that if any one particular network is hacked, or for example if it is compromised, then it will not further provides access to another network, because that is different network altogether. So this is the importance of having segmentation in the network layer, so that the blast radius can be minimized and can help the organization to recover very quickly. So these are the three important guiding principles of zero trust that we need to understand to control the identities in the organization. To achieve that zero trust, there are a lot of components. What are those important components? Yes, identities are the first and important component, followed by devices and data, applications, infrastructure, and network. But everything is centrally controlled. Which user needs to access which resource, and which device is allowed, which device are considered as compliant, which device are considered as non-compliant, and what are those data points and how it is allowed to access. Everything is centrally controlled using this zero trust security model. We can say it is as a heart and brain of infrastructure to protect this complete components of zero trust. So considering that these are the different components of zero trust, now our session today is focusing only on identities part. We will see how can we can protect and how we can secure within the identities component. To understand that identity securing component, it is very important to understand why do we require zero trust. As I said, the last couple of years, and especially in the pandemic, the complete style of working and connecting to the organization has changed drastically worldwide. It has brought the COVID has brought us to stand still, and every organization got worried who were not having that capabilities of connecting from anywhere. They started developing all those things. They started implementing lot of features and lot of changes within the organization and enabled a lot of users to work from home. So now, since the devices are going out of the network because they are connecting from any part of the world, so it has increased the complexities in the existing IT security, because many devices, users, and connections that has to be controlled. So in the similar fashion, the trusted network has to be developed, because initially, as I explained, the attackers used to attack at the network level, and now those attacks has reduced, because since the users are no more limited or restricted into those networks, they are outside. Now attackers are focusing on making their identities hacked. Any identities, if they are getting compromised, that is when they have options of attacking and damaging all those required things in the user's organization. As I said, the assets, any bring your own devices or mobile devices or working from home options, and many of the applications in today's world are SaaS based. So everything is leaving the organization's network heavily. So it is very important, how do we control them? How do we protect them? Because if they are not part of organization's network, it is very important and critical that they needs to be controlled and protected and secured. That's when we need zero trust. And it is very important to have it in the an environment to stay 100% protected from the attackers. So to achieve that deployment of a zero trust security model, we have these four options in Azure AD to achieve and help all the identities to be secured. Of course, they come with the Azure AD Premium license, and that is on top of the additional standalone licenses which can be procured. So enabling single sign-on for applications is the first one. What do we get out of this? Just that all the applications, if we have third-party applications or any applications, integrate them with Azure AD, is federate them with Azure AD and on-premises systems. So once that federation is there, then there will be a single point of control where we can consolidate everything, and we can have we can establish the identity foundation within that Azure AD, so that we can also leverage the integration of applications with Azure AD. only then the first guiding principles can be taken care. Because once we do all these things, it will help us to verify explicitly with strong authentication. If we don't have that strong authentication mechanism, then the identities can be easily compromised, and a lot of things will be at stake, and many risks will get associated with that. That's when enabling SSO for all applications is the important thing here to achieve the complete zero trust model. Next is conditional access. Conditional access is a very key thing. We can say a CPU of a computer, it is same like a central processing unit for complete Azure AD security. So conditional access is very, very important. How it controls, we can create a lot of permutation and combination mechanism within this conditional access in Azure AD, because you can have those policies when a user is connecting from on-premises network, then don't prompt him for a MFA, multi-factor authentication. That policy can be configured. But if the same user is going outside the network and connecting from out of the network to access the resource, then make sure he gets that multi-factor authentication, second layer of authentication, just to make sure that the right user is accessing the right resources. There is absolutely no compromise with misusing of any identities. And also, if a user is logging in from a domain joined machine or a Azure hybrid joined machine, then don't prompt him for MFA. But if the user is logging in from different machine, which is not compliant, which is not from a domain, which is not from a corporate network, then prompt him for a multi-factor authentication and make sure that the right user is getting access to it. So these are all the conditional access policies will literally help. And also it enables, it have the provision to confirm or to configure certain trusted locations. So within the IP ranges, within the locations, within the network, we can make sure that this is a trusted location. So don't trust these connections coming from this particular location. And if anything coming out of this trusted location, make sure it needs to be validated thoroughly with the additional layers of policies. So this is how the conditional access takes care. Really a very good feature, and majority of the risks will be reduced with conditional access, and it helps to access with least privileged access within that. And identity governance, which is privileged identity management. So this is a just-in-time access. Whenever, as I already explained in the previous slide, if any user is required to do certain set of tasks, it's not necessary that he has to do it every day, but at least once in a month, he might be having some task to do it. But throughout the month, having that access for him and keeping it idle will put into a lot of risk. So that's when this just-in-time access will come into picture. That make sure that whenever any user or admin has any task, just request for that permissions and get it granted, and then do the task and revoke that task, so that unnecessary additional access is not left unattended to any user's identity. So this is very important, because now users are not limited or restricted within the corporate boundaries or within the physical locations. They are anywhere. We do not know, and we can't predict where the user's location is. That's when all these kind of configurations and control in a consolidated manner would really help the organizations to keep track of their security. That's when it is very important under identity governance. Privileged identity management is very, very helpful. And the last one, but not the least, of course, it is a determining risk and protection. determining risk and protection. So this is about Azure AD password protection. So this is one of the best features as well within the Azure AD. So every users are, we do not have that understanding that which user wants what kind of passwords. Many users are very addicted to have a easy password setup because they don't understand the risks associated with that. They just want to have a easy password setup so that it can make their lives easy. But if with this Azure AD protection, password protection, it will not allow users to create or enable easy passwords for their identities, because easy passwords are more prone to get compromised. Anybody can predict your passwords and they try to attack, and hackers can easily get access to your accounts. That's when with Azure AD password protection, that can be avoided. And once we enable that identity protection, we also have a great features and functionalities within Azure with cloud app security integration with this identity protection, because lot of analysis in the background Microsoft does, and lot of artificial intelligence sensors keep running in the behind background. And in the cloud app security portal, we can get all sorts of consolidated view for all the identities. If any third party applications, if we have, even that can be integrated with cloud app security. Not only with Azure, it is not limited to Azure, but Google Cloud, AWS can also be integrated with Cloud App Security, which is one of the best integration security tools, which will give you a detailed insight about the user's behavior, login behavior, and a lot of things, where it will showcase the high risk, medium risk, low risk with which account. Accordingly, administrators can take immediate actions on the suspicious account information. So this will help us in controlling overall the identities with these four configurations if we do. I hope this was very informative, and I hope you have understood all these points. And when we see a demonstration, Hasnain will be showing each and every feature in the lab, how we can configure. Moving on to the next slide for the demonstration, and I would like to hand over to Hasnain so that he can take over the demonstration in his lab. And if anybody has noted down the questions, I'm very glad that after this demonstration, we will have a Q&A session, and would be more than happy to answer as many as questions on this session today. Over to you, Hasnain. Hasnain, you are on mute.
Hey Hasnain, are you on mute?
Thank you so much, Sebastain, for giving great insights about conditional access and zero trust security model. All right. So what we are going to cover in the demo today is, okay. So in demo, I'm going to cover about the Azure Identity Protection, which basically works based on the user risk and the sign-in risk. And it also helps you to push the MFA enforcement for all the users in the organization. Then we'll look at some of the conditional access policy, like enforcing MFA for users when they are accessing it externally, and when not to prompt for multi-factor authentication when they are accessing from the network perimeter of the organization. And then we'll also see how we can integrate Azure AD with cloud application for single sign-on access and keep Azure AD as a central control point. And then towards the end, we'll go through the demo for Azure Privileged Identity Management. In this, we will see how an administrator can assign a role to the administrators and how they can activate their role and how they can perform their activities. All right, so let's get into the lab. Okay. All right. So let's look at the Azure AD Identity Protection. Okay. So in AD Identity Protection, it protects you at 3 different levels. So starting with the user risk policy. Okay. And this policy, it looks for if the user credential have been compromised. Okay. So what happens when the cyber criminals stole the credentials, right? They try to sell it in the black market, okay, or on the dark web. Microsoft acquires or take those services and see if they found any credentials which are on the dark web and it's matching to the existing user. If it does, it will highlight here and then suggest you that, hey, this user is on a high risk, potentially his credentials have been compromised. Okay, so what action we can define as a policy to say that, okay, if the user is at, let's say, at risk high, okay, what control do you want to put in? Do you want to block the access, or do you want to grant the access but you want him to change the password? Okay, so you can grant the access and ask him to change the password at next login. Okay, now looking at the sign-in risk policy, right? Sign-in risk policy basically works on signals, which in, like, if the signals are the user is signing in, let's say, from unfamiliar location where he has never signed earlier, okay, or he's trying to use the Tor browser or anonymous IP, okay, so those will be considered in the sign-in risk. Okay. Also, if there is an impossible travel, so for an instance, a user logs in Singapore, okay, and within 10-15 minutes there is another login request comes from India. Now that is impossible for a user to travel within 15 minutes from Singapore to India, right? So that will be considered as a sign-in risk. Okay, so based on the sign-in risk, okay, you can either block the access or allow the access with challenging for multi-factor authentication. Okay, now the MFA registration policy, this basically enforce users to register for multi-factor authentication when they sign up for Office 365 or when you create their user account in Office 365 or in the Azure. Okay, and make sure that whenever you do that, the policy is enforced. Okay, so if you look at just one single user, okay, which I managed to get the risk, okay, this is how it will highlight it. Okay, and the reason to highlight this is basically it was unfamiliar location. Means in my earlier login session, I logged in from Singapore and this request came from Hong Kong. Okay, so now let's take a look at the conditional access. Okay, all right. So conditional access is basically a tool which used by the Azure Active Directory to bring all different sorts of signals together to make the decision and enforce the organization policy. So those signals can be from user device, user identity, user location, the application he is accessing, what time is he accessing those applications. So these are the different kind of signals which gets into conditional access policy. Okay, so in this lab, I have got the conditional access policy, which suggests that, okay, let's take a look at here. It suggests that you can apply it to a specific user or group. In this case, this is the user Hasnain Shaikh at mscloudguru.com. And when he tries to access for the application Office 365, what are the two different conditions should meet in order to allow the access, okay? So in the client apps, I have selected browser, mobile app, or other clients. Now, other clients would be your legacy clients like POP, IMAP, or SMTP, or if you're using Outlook 2013 as well, that also uses the legacy authentication. Okay, what are other different options that you can, conditions that you can configure? So user risk, if based on the Azure AD identity protection, it will determine the user risk, and whatever you have defined here, okay, high, medium, or low, it will consider those user risk policy as well. Okay, similarly, it goes for the sign-in risk. Device platform, whether it's an Android device, iOS, or Windows, okay, or it's a Mac OS. Okay, so depending upon that granularity you have, where you can create the conditional access policy and apply it to the specific user objects or user accounts. Okay, so in this case, in a control, I have said that, okay, we will grant the access, but we will grant the access only through the hybrid Azure AD joint device. Okay, so now we'll see the user tries to access the resource outside the company network, and he shouldn't be able to access. And when he accesses it from the company network, okay, he should be able to access since he has the domain joint device. At the same time, you can also configure device state. As of now, it's in purview, okay, but later once we get it, you'll have the option to choose whether the device state is compliant or non-compliant, and that will be based on the compliance policy that you will have defined in your endpoint management. Okay, so I'll try to log in here with one of the user account. Okay, Hasnain Shaikh. Okay. Right. Okay, so since I have enforced the MFA for everyone, I get the prompt for multi-factor authentication. All right, so you see here, now this has blocked the user access, saying that, okay, if you want to access, this looks to be a personal device. It has to be a domain joint device only. So in this, if you see, right, I have got Exchange Online as an app, right? But if you have some other applications which are integrated with Azure Active Directory for a single sign-on, okay, that can be limited as well. So like if I have a GitHub, let's say, just an example, right? I can do that. Organizations like using ServiceNow or other applications, okay, those can be integrated here as well. Similarly, you can also add like Google Cloud Apps or AWS. Okay, those access can be also restricted. So you see, using these conditional access, okay, you can have the identity-driven control, you know. Okay, so let's try to access the same user. Okay, I'll try to access from here, but this is the device that I have, which is a domain joint device, and it's also a hybrid joint device. Okay, let me just sign up from here. Okay, since it's a domain joint device and user is already logged in here, okay, he didn't get challenged for MFA, and also he's able to access the resources. Okay, so that's the beauty of conditional access policies. Okay, the same user was when he tried to access from outside, he wasn't able to access. At the same time, he was also challenged for multi-factor authentication. While the same user tries to access internally using the hybrid domain joint device, okay, he didn't get the prompt for multi-factor authentication. All right, now let's take a look at another conditional access policy, that is to disable the legacy authentication. Okay. So last year, Microsoft wanted to disable the, work on to disable the basic auth, because some of the conditional access policies cannot be applied to legacy authentication. The signal doesn't come to conditional access. Okay. So uh, in order to disable that, okay, what we need to do is in the conditions, okay, under client apps, choose the other clients. Okay, all the browser and mobile app clients that you see, those uses the modern auth clients. Okay. One more thing to note down here, uh, if you have configured or have existing Exchange Active Sync client policy or conditional access policy, make sure that any other policy that you create, except Exchange Active Sync clients, do not select any other types of client. Okay, otherwise this will create a big problem. uh, Another thing is, whenever you create the conditional access policy, always try to reduce the audience for this. Try to keep it to a shorter audience, like specific user groups. Okay. And put it to the report only mode initially. Okay. And monitor it. If it goes fine, then you can go ahead and apply it for everyone. All right, so that covers pretty much for the conditional access. Okay, now we'll quickly take a look at how we can integrate Azure Active Directory uh, for single sign-on access to other cloud-based applications. Okay, you can also have it for on-premise as well. Okay, so I'll look at the one of the application that I integrated here. So I integrated the application called GitHub. All right. So basically, in order to add, okay, you simply need to click on new application, and you'll be able to find all different sorts of application that you can integrate with Azure AD. And what benefits it brings, just to give you the background information, uh, most of the times the organization, they have multiple cloud solutions, and each cloud solution requires identity. At times when the user gets terminated, okay, we forget or we miss to terminate their identities in cloud or different clouds in a timely fashion. So if you put Azure AD as a central control point, okay, even if you just need to terminate the Azure AD account, okay, and that will terminate the user access from all other sorts of cloud applications. Okay, so in this case, I had added GitHub, okay, and I configured. So in order to do that, there are certain configuration that you need to do. So least privilege, right? By default, you have the option, right? The user assignment required. Okay. So that means only the users which I have allowed, they can have the SSO access for this application. Not all the users in the organization would have that. Okay. Maybe for certain application, this may be valid. Okay. Maybe like ServiceNow or some application which is used by everyone in the organization. For that, you can choose like user assignment not required. Okay, but the critical application or which requires only specific people to access it, you should go ahead with the user assignment required, yes. Okay, and under the user and groups, this is where you can add the groups or define the user who should be able to access the single sign-on to access that particular application. Okay, and there are different ways of having the single sign-on. In this case, I have chosen SAML. Okay, so you need to configure the identifier, the reply URL, where the traffic should be redirected once the token has been generated from Azure AD. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in using this user who have already logged in. Okay, and see how he can access the GitHub without getting prompt for login. Okay, or using his Azure AD credentials. Okay, so I'm logged in here with the user Hasnain at mscloudgo.com, and I'll go ahead and access the GitHub application. So you see, it redirects me to Office 365 for a login. Okay, so I'm in here. I use my Azure AD credential. I do not need to key in the credentials of GitHub in order to log in there. Okay, so that's the beauty it brings when you integrate with a single sign-on using the Azure Active Directory. And there are hundreds of, thousands of applications that you can integrate with Azure Active Directory. Microsoft has given a great document in terms of, all the different applications that you can integrate. So you see here, right, all the multiple documents you can find here. Okay, now just to give a, because SSO is a two-way configuration, I can quickly show you on the application side, right, you need to also have certain configuration. Okay, each application would have a different configuration, but pretty much require similar stuff. Okay, so it would require like a sign-on URL that where basically when the request comes for a sign-in, where it should redirect. Okay, and who would be the issuer for the tokens. Okay, and you can enforce that, hey, all these users challenge for SSO. Okay, is it, make sure that you have some certain codes or some break glass accounts, so that in case if the SSO is not working, you can still manage to log in there. Okay, now quickly we'll go to the Azure privilege identity management demo, and then I think we should be good to go. All right, so what I'm going to do here, all right, so this is a user. Okay, and if you look at his access today, right, he doesn't have any access. He's just a normal user. Okay, what we are going to do is we are going to assign him a user administrator privilege. Okay, and we'll see how the user needs to activate it in order to perform his job. Okay, like if I, so there is no admin access to him. Okay, so let's go to the privilege. Okay, so here what I need to do, I need to go to the Azure AD rules. Okay, in the rules there will be different sorts of roles that we have. Okay, and we can customize, we can assign the eligibility or make it active assignment based on the different rules we have. Okay, so in this case I'm going to choose user administrator. And as a best practice, right, whenever you're doing this for a global admin account, make sure that you have the break glass account. Okay, just in case if something breaks and doesn't work, you have a way to get in. All right, so this is how I'm going to assign the access. Okay, and here it gives you two options: assignment type. So assignment type eligible means user will have the permission, but he needs to go ahead and activate his role before he could get the access. Okay, active means he would have the access, he doesn't need to go ahead and activate it. Okay, so let's say I'll give him the eligible permission. All right, and depending upon the higher roles, you can define whether the user can activate their roles themselves, or it should be activated, or they should request to the their management, or the manager to approve their access. You can also assign the permission based on while activating, right, based on certain change requests. So if the change request requires between, let's say, 10 to 12 p.m. Access, you can give the permission specific for that duration only, so that during a change he can go ahead and activate his role and then perform the job. Okay, so here still a user doesn't have any access. Now what I'll do, I'll go to the Azure AD Privilege Management and look at my roles. Okay, so you see here, I do have the user administrator role. Okay, and there is no active assignment for this. Okay, so I'll go ahead and activate the role. And I can choose if I want to have the custom activation start time, like I mentioned, during the change window only. And I can reduce that how many number of hours. Okay, so let's say I give him for 8 hours, and I say change request, and I click on activate. It will verify in the background and then validate the user activation. Okay, might take a few seconds here. All right. So now if you see active assignment, right, it will show that yes, this is the role which is activated for the user. And if I look at the Azure Active Directory and the roles and administrator, you would see that this user is an user administrator now. Okay, that's it pretty much from my side in the demo.